Okay, I'm supposed to do brief remarks. Good morning. How was breakfast?
Delicious.
Good. Always good to get audience participation early on in the morning, particularly this early in the morning. But I was talking to Kevin and Clark. Today's a big day for our administration. Our career ladder bill is up in the House, so I told them that I had some real newsworthy things I was going to say, and they both had to leave early, so I'm going to wait until that happens. So with that, I'm ready. There's the end of my brief remarks. So who's going to be first?
So if I may, I will ask the first question.
Oh, that's so unlike you.
Some legislators have been talking about adding exemptions to the Idaho Public Records Act to exempt themselves and their communications. And some of them have even been saying that you, Governor, would support this. And so I have two questions. One, is that true? And two, if so, why would you want to reduce the transparency of our policy-making process in Idaho?
I have no idea. I have no idea about what they're talking about. What the particulars of it is. Whose bill is it?
It hasn't been introduced.
I think there was, there is one. We do have one issue with corrections that I think is going around. It's not one of our bills. So I'm just not, I'm not familiar with it. I haven't seen it, but I know you will keenly watch it, so.
So, Governor, are you not supporting additional exemptions
Well,
to the public records
well,
act
you know,
beyond
we know what the,
issue that's already been in committee about?
we've changed with, and we always reach out to the press club. When I say we, I'm talking about the state. We did it at, when we did cyber analysis. Went out and did a cyber analysis. Where have we got, where are weaknesses in our system? And we didn't want, it's not that the people in this room are the problem. It's other people with more nefarious issues. So, as society changes and risks change, sometimes you look at it. But generally, my position is, a great deal of sunshine and transparency in government is good. I think you'll find that's the position of my administration. So I haven't seen it. So.
Great. And final follow-up.
You will get reelected to the press club. So.
Idaho currently has no administrative appeal process to its Public Records Act. If you're denied in a public records request, all you can do is sue. Do you support establishing an ombudsman or some other way to have an administrative level of appeal for public records denials?
I'd look at it. I mean, we'd look at the details of it. I think, I hear from agencies. Some of them say, we have a budget request because we've had all these requests for information. I'm saying, why don't you just give it to them instead of going to the DAGs and going through all this? They'll say, well, our Attorney General's fees are up because we've had all these requests. I said, well, you wouldn't be a problem if you just give it to them. And that's kind of where I come from, is why, because it costs the taxpayers. If they go through, all the intricacies of denying and then having to give it, it costs the state and the taxpayers money. And generally, if they're hiding something, it probably shouldn't be hidden. That's my feeling on it.
Thank you, Governor. Questions from reporters?
Vote for Betsy.
Bill Spence.
Hi, Bill.
Governor, some of the first bills introduced this session had to do with taking more government dollars for transportation. Have you given any indication to legislators on your receptiveness to that idea?
Yes, I have.
Can you share?
Well, I mean, I've been pretty open about my position on it. That I am not clear over where my predecessor was, where it absolutely has to be all user fees. But if you're going to do long-term transportation, you got to have a sustainable source of revenue, and when there's a recession, and there will be one, I don't know when, a lot of my budget initiatives early were about making sure we had adequate rainy day funds, moving some other issues there. Why would I do that? And I got all these accolades from the legislature, and then they're going to peel that out. And they know that, but I said, look, I'll look at the details of it and see what that is. But my position is generally we should have long-term sustainable transportation funding, because then you can plan for it. If you're doing a great big project, you need to know that you're going to have continuous revenue, and you need revenue that's available, because the federal government, I believe, at some point in time, now they've kind of done the Lucy with the football deal with us over and over about, oh yeah, the Congress and the president talk about more money for infrastructure, and then there's no there. But I think at some point in time there will be, and we need to have a source of revenue for matching. And I'm all for that. But I would prefer the money not be from the general fund, that the money be from traditional transportation funding. But I'm open to all options.
So is there any thought about doing another transportation interim committee or task force?
Well, there's one going on now, or is going to start, which is AGC in the cities, and I've talked about it. I think for it to be effective, there need to be critics of transportation. Are we being efficient at the state level? Are we being efficient at the local level? It shouldn't be all advocates, because my experience is to get it done, it has to be very well vetted. As you well know, I chaired the last task force on transportation, and it was a pretty broad group, and you need some critics on there, so it's got credibility when you make the presentation.
Good question.
Scott.
Along the lines of transportation, Governor, ITD oversees more than 1,800 bridges across the state. And according to many reports, by next year, 2021, more than half of them will have been around longer than their intended lifespan. Transportation Department says that they simply don't have the money to keep up with the problem, and we don't have enough money to rebuild the bridges that are out there, and at our current funding levels, we cannot keep our bridges in the condition that they are in today. Is the legislature ignoring a potential crisis situation?
I actually have a meeting with a legislator on bridges today. We were going to have it yesterday afternoon, and my schedule was so filled up, but we had a brief visit, and we're going to talk about that today. But I believe the numbers are our bridges that were, and this comes from my previous experience, our bridges that are engineered, and that's the lifespan that you talk about, to be between 50 and 60 years, we're going to have to last for 120 years. The ITD has, in their STIP, which is their long-term planning, have brought that number down. We still got a long way to go, but I think now the number's like 100 years. So it needs to be 60. It was 120. It's now 100, but we're going to have some more initiative in it. But we're just talking about ITD. Cities, counties, highway districts, there's a big number over in that category, which unfortunately I don't have as good as statistics on, because we don't aggregate that data as well as we should. But if we're going to address it on the state side, I also need to address it on but I'm all in. I mean, it's first thing about a bridge, there's a safety issue, but second, it's a big commerce issue too. We've got areas where during harvest, the loaded trucks have to go clear around a bridge. The empty trucks can go back across it because of the load limits on the bridges, and that just costs us a lot of money. But the legislature bring me a viable solution, and I'm very interested in it. So.
Well, again, my question in a sense was, do you think the legislature has dropped the ball on this particular issue?
Well,
This is not good.
Well, I think raising taxes in Idaho is hard, and that's what you're talking about. You know, our first question was about, from Bill, was about the fact that, we're starting to get our rainy day fund kind of in the area, and I don't think we ought to be high grading the rainy day fund. We did have a surplus eliminator program that's gone now. So I think the legislature's wrestling with the issue. They all talk about how important transportation is to them, but the bridge is a maintenance issue. On top of the maintenance issue, with the incredible growth we got, that we have here in Idaho, we've also got the congestion issue. So you got to look at both of them, both the maintenance and the congestion.
But the only bill related to bridges this session is one in which ITD will just get some more money to inspect them. When will there be money to repair them or improve them?
That's a good question. You might be asking the wrong branch of government.
Next question from James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio.
Governor, there has been 3 bills that were introduced last week that restrict the rights of transgender people, including one related to birth certificates, which has already been, a similar one has already been ruled unconstitutional by the federal court here. Do you support these bills, or would you veto them if they got your desk?
I have not seen them.
You haven't seen them?
No, I've read some of your incredible good reporting on them, but I haven't seen the bills, so.
Are there in general issues that you support?
I'm not a big discrimination guy. I think there ought to be fair, and obviously we have to comply with constitutional challenges. And I haven't seen the analysis about, and I think I said this a couple days ago. Some of these are a reaction to things that are happening in other states that might not be quite that applicable here in Idaho, but I haven't seen the details of it. So.
Clark Corbin, Idaho Education News.
Yeah, thanks, Governor, for being here today. Your teacher plan, teacher pay proposal is going to be up in less than an hour. Can you tell us about what you're hoping to do and why you want to prioritize it this year?
Well, it's been a constant theme of mine for the year, month, and 2 weeks that I've been governor that we have to be competitive on teacher pay. And this is not a big outlier from what the first task force, and it sure wasn't an outlier from what our task force, Our Kids, Idaho's Future, it lines right up with that. But it also has a nexus to property taxes. I might get a question this morning, I'm just guessing, about property taxes. And a lot of the supplemental levies, particularly in border communities, are to be competitive on teacher pay, particularly veteran teachers. And that's what that bill does, is address those people. For the non-education people, you start up here as a rookie teacher and you end up your career down here on a grid, and this puts money in that part of the grid, and that's what it's intended to do.
And why focus on, I know it was the recommendation from your task force, why focus on veteran teachers at this particular time?
Because I did legislation, and this is the second year of it, of starting teacher pay, and you just have to be careful that you don't create some gaps in the grid and cause unfair compression elsewhere to where there's not, you're not rewarding teachers that are doing the really, really hard work.
Next question is from Nicole Foy of the Idaho State.
Governor, Latino students are trailing other Idaho students by nearly every metric. A recent report from the State Department of Education just showed that graduation rates for Hispanic students have dropped, graduation rates for migrant students have dropped. Should the state be working on any specific plans for this demographic of students, especially since they're growing part of Idaho schools?
I actually took your story yesterday and sent it to both the state board and because it talked about advanced opportunities, and it didn't talk about dual credit, because I wanted to say, let's look at the dual credit part of it, because our dual credit, or our advanced opportunities dual credit is much more uniform. And when I talk to the Hispanic Commission and the Latino community, but I gotta get those kids reading. That's why literacy is my #1 priority, and I talked to the Hispanic Commission about it a week or 2 weeks ago when they were here, that's my number one priority, is to get all kids reading. And I was with a bunch of superintendents day before yesterday, and what's taken place as we advance our literacy efforts, the $27 million this year that's going to be ongoing, I hope that's wood, is if I can get that literacy investment going and give those districts direction, that those English language learners are going to have a lot better chance at doing everything else that's farther on, and that's why that's my highest priority.
Well, and English language learners though are only about 25% of the students. So at a certain point when a demographic of students not connected to language ability are consistently behind in nearly every metric that we're looking at, is there going to be a plan or a discussion about addressing these
Well,
specific groups?
well, as everybody in this room knows, Idaho's a local control state. And I'm going to be in Jerome Saturday. And the dual language immersion program in Jerome, I was down there when I was at that school where they're making great progress. Other school districts were showing up there to see what's taking place there. And success in Idaho usually starts in a few school districts and then migrates to everybody else. And basically the literacy money that's available is to address that, because if they are not a proficient at the end of the third grade, it's because part of their demographic is not getting there, and it's cause and effect. If the effect is they're not getting there, then they need to go address the cause, and a lot of that is that population you're talking about.
The next question is from Keith Riddler of the Associated Press.
Hi, Keith.
Just a two-part question on administrative rules. The first part, are you satisfied with how lawmakers are dealing with administrative rules and getting them so far? And then the second part, your administration was super concerned about people losing confidence in state government over this whole rules thing. And right now, the House and Senate haven't reached a deal. At what point do Idaho citizens say, state lawmakers, do something like that?
Well, yes, I am concerned about confidence in government. I will tell you that outside of this room, when I travel around the state of Idaho, the natural friction that occurs between the House and Senate doesn't register. And in fact, a lot of people, the rules process doesn't register. What they want to know is if they're applying for a permit or they want to do something, what's the friction cost of government? I talk about this all the time. And we have significantly reduced the friction cost of government by what's taken place in the last, not even a year on rules. The rules process is not, it's like a lot of government, it's not perfect, but most people that follow other states and do business in other states will say that our process in Idaho is one of the best. It's got a few warts on it, as any process that has the administrative, the executive branch and the legislative branch in the review, but not having that is worse. Basically, when you write a law and the law says, and the agency will promulgate rules, we have a process where we promulgate rules, and the public, most importantly, and then the legislature gets to follow up. I think my zero-based regulation is going to help that, because some of the criticism is the fact that in a committee meeting where there's hardly any public input, an issue will come up and they'll strike this out of a rule or they'll make a change. But in our zero-based regulation, every 5 years, 20% of the rules will go through a full public process. I think that the zero-based regulation that we're going to implement will help some of those issues about transparency about changes in the
I guess
rules.
my question is, if the House and Senate don't do an agreement, we're gonna do 100% of the rules every year. Is that a good way for government to function?
That's not my preferred route.
Next question is from Sharon Fisher of the Idaho Business Review.
Hi, Governor. Well, you have been
offer their own broadband internet. What do you feel about that bill?
I had a discussion with the author of that bill yesterday, and they are aware that some changes need to be made. There were basically, Ammon brought a bill, even though they didn't need it because they're already up and going and they had judicial confirmation. They brought a bill, and I knew when they did that some of the providers, and we told them when they did it, because I listen occasionally, not as much as I should, my wife would tell me. And I knew there was going to be a problem. That is actually a healthy process because you've got the cities and Iron, which is the backbone they're using, which is for our hospitals and our schools and the lab. And there were some accusations that Iron is unfairly competing against, which is what, if you were in the committee hearing, you probably heard about that. We are addressing a lot of that. We're making pretty good progress because we got two distinctly different bills, and the process works good when everybody gets together. Hopefully we'll get something done. It is critical enough that I had a meeting yesterday. There's some action taking place in the Silver Valley, which is one of the most deficient in broadband connectivity, and I don't want to get in the way of it, but broadband's going to look different in different places. You know, new little communities are ripping fiber into everybody's house, and that's great. But areas that are a lot more remote are going to have more of a wireless connection. And what we want to do is facilitate what's the most affordable and most effective long-term down the way. One of the things that the private entities were saying is that the cities would form one of these local improvement districts. It would be they said, and it looked like that, and the legislature's sympathetic to it. It looked like artificial, they're creating a utility and then they're keeping their competition out. There's actually legislation that says, if I show up and I'm Brad's cable company and I want to have access to the alleys and the sidewalks, I can get it. Now, how it's administered is up for discussion, but these are good discussions. We got a long way to go on broadband, and the fact that we've got those two bills out there that they're working on. I believe my one FTE at Commerce will be implemented, and that'll be a source where we can aggregate all this data and make recommendations going forward.
Okay, the next question is from Logan Finney of Thorson.
Good morning, Governor. I'll be the one to ask the property tax question today.
Well, that's just because you're the first.
Sure. There is a bill pending a vote in the House this week that would freeze local taxing districts, cities, counties, the portions of their budgets funded by property taxes. And the way it's been positioned in the chamber is it's meant to be kind of the stick in the carrot and the stick equation to get cities and counties to come to the table to talk about property tax relief.
You're getting to be a great reporter, Logan.
Thank you. Do you think this is a good approach moving forward on property taxes? Do we need to have this freeze hanging over everyone's heads?
I mean, you cast it right. I mean, I think they said it on the floor. I know they've said it in the halls, is that the freeze or the new construction, there's two issues. There's the freeze and then there's the new construction, are both incentives for cities, counties, school districts, fill in the blank, to show up at the table. But the legislature, a lot of them recognize that that's not necessarily a problem everywhere. It's a problem in areas where there's explosive residential value growth. I was in Washington last week, and they were almost incredulous when I said, out of all the metropolitan areas of the United States, out of the top 10, I've got half of them. Coeur d'Alene, Nampa, Boise, Pocatello, and Idaho Falls. The fastest growing residential values. Because of the way our property taxes work, that is that has ramifications. I was around in 2006, matter of fact, I was on the interim property tax. It was a little different because it was even more focused on resort areas. I think having the discussion is good. And of course, this goes back to my teacher pay issue. A lot of those property taxes are because of all the supplemental levies that are being passed, and I prefer we didn't have more supplemental levies. But there's gonna be a discussion on it, but there are taxing districts where most people's property taxes went down. And they are not the ones that are causing a lot of the consternation over there, so.
Yeah, so a lot of the issues with property taxes are very localized. Do you think it's a good idea to have such a broad statewide fix to it, or do you think we need to go through things with a little finer detail?
I think the way you cast it is accurate, that motion was a move to get everybody at the table and to have the discussion. There are taxing districts where whether it's the commissioners of the city or whoever it is, have been very, very frugal about what they've done, and all of a sudden we've got a growth in economic activity. Why would you penalize them that were conservative all along from saying, we're gonna be conservative until there's growth, then we're gonna harvest that growth to do some of the things we need to do. I was telling one of the legislative leaders, I am old enough, I remember the 1% and what happened as a result of the 1%. And what happened as a result of the 1% was we had a proliferation of taxing districts. Every one of them was capped. So you've got ambulance districts, and you've got recreation districts, and you've got sewer districts because the city was capped. And when you do these things, which is not uncommon, you need to look at the unintended consequences of what will happen if this happens. Because if there's a need, we have avenues in Idaho to get around it, but do we really want more taxing districts? That's.
Would you sign the freeze bill if it made it to your
I
desk?
haven't, I'd have to see it, and I do not believe that option will be available to me, so.
The
But
next question is from Riley Hahn of McClure Center.
Hey, good morning, Governor. So the issue of dam breaching has been in the news a lot.
can you say that at the press?
In a family-friendly way. The issue of dam breaching has been in the news a lot lately. Oregon's governor came out in favor of breaching some dams on the.
Well, I'm gonna
Columbia
annex
River.
part of her state just to make up for it.
She basically said that it's the only viable option left for improving salmon survival rates. There is a resolution moving through the legislature right now that would oppose the removal of these dams. There's some concerns among ag producers in the north part of the state specifically who say that it's a key source of their income being able to ship grain out of Lewiston down the Columbia River out to the Pacific Ocean. How would you feel about removal of these dams, and if you're against it, what alternative options are out there?
Well, the issue isn't dams, the issue is salmon recovery. And that's why I put together my salmon recovery broad-based task force that's looking at all the options. Timing, there was, people, and they shouldn't be patient given the deplorable drop in salmon numbers. And we're all aware of the fact that a lot of that is ocean conditions. You give me better ocean conditions. We had better ocean conditions. Our return and recovery rates were going way up. The question is, how do you compensate for those ocean conditions? And we're doing that. There's a flex spill to where at critical times we try and increase the flow rate so that those smolts can make it down the river on a more timely basis with cooler water. There's what do we do in hatcheries? What do we do with barging? What do we do with other recovery? What do we do about habitat? Those are all being addressed, and I do not want Idaho to lose, because we can't do it anyway. It'll take an act of Congress. And the other thing is there's an EIS coming out, I think within a month, that's going to address this at the federal level in the Bonneville Power Administration. At a minimum, before we take activity, we ought to see what the result of that EIS is.
The next question is from John Soule of the Idaho Statesman.
Hi, John.
Hi, how are you? One Emmett person to another.
That's right. We're going to take over.
Last week, Concordia University announced that they were shutting down their Portland campus and are seeking some kind of partner to take over the Boise Law School. What's your thoughts on that? And is the state taking any active role in helping them?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. It's unfortunate for the students. I will say that I tip my hat to NNU and College of Idaho for standing up and volunteering to take some of those students. Good for them, because it's very disruptive to those students. And I don't know, and of course that's the Portland campus, the law students here, and I don't even know if we have capacity. I don't think we do, because I think the current law school here at the University of Idaho has at the old courthouse. I don't know that there's room for them.
They've told me, the dean of the colleges told me that they would take
Oh, good, good.
Concordia's law students if something else
Yeah.
wasn't arranged. They said that, I think that was in 2014 when they didn't get their
Accreditation, yeah, yeah.
A number of students went to the University of Idaho program.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
The next question is from Kevin Richard of Idaho Education News.
Governor, another one of your education line items is $1 million for social emotional learning training for teachers. That issue had quite a bit of resistance in the House Education Committee last week. Do you think this proposal is in trouble, and how much are you working this issue?
It's, I've talked about it as part of the task force recommendation. Obviously, the superintendent it's very important to her. I will tell you that when I was back in Washington, in the White House in one breakout group with about 7 governors, this is not unique. The challenges that our students have are almost incredible compared to what they were not that many years ago. And of course, this does not give money to teachers. This does not start new programs. This is just training. That $1 million is just training and help for those teachers in the classroom that are having some of these problems, to where we can get ahead of the problem, which I think is the right thing to do. I think that if I read Clark's reporting correctly, I think they were really not necessarily talking about what that $1 million line item is about. They were talking about it from a different angle. But
Do you think there's a lack of understanding of
Yes.
where this issue is and what kids are facing?
But
Years ago?
I think we'll get there. It's I tell this story. I was in the meeting and we were talking about this very issue, and Governor Lee and I was going to brag about my $1 million, and Governor Lee says, I put $320 million into it, and I go, boy, I'm glad I didn't say anything. But he put it into a trust fund to where the interest off of it goes to it. But this is not a unique in Idaho issue. This is being addressed by everybody, and of course, I've got a dual motivation. A, number one, it's the right thing to do, but B, my corrections challenges, a lot of those are mental health, substance abuse, and if I can work on it in the schools, I can lessen the demand for services and corrections. So I see it but most importantly, it's the right thing to do for these kids. But secondly, it will help in a lot of our other overarching issues we got in the state of Idaho, and that's why that's a big issue for me. So.
The next question is from Logan Potter of The Arbiter.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Logan.
Yesterday was Boise State Day at the Capitol, where you signed the proclamation that February 8th
How'd I do?
is great.
Oh, thank you.
But it brings forward the issue of the proposed budget cuts that are likely to impact the university and its students. As Idaho's population, particularly in higher education, continues to grow, what impact do you foresee these cuts having on the future of Idaho's higher education, and what role do you foresee the state playing in that?
Well, you need to remember, everybody except K-12 got the exact same treatment. If it's somewhere cast as I'm picking on higher education, that is not the case at all. Matter of fact, one of my issues in my higher education budget is to make the opportunity scholarships, ongoing funding, because that's one of the ways you can address the challenges in higher education. There's several building projects that are going on, but to me, as in all of government, with the reset, I expect all the agencies to look at how do they cut their ongoing overhead and still provide the services that they need to do. You know, some of the presidents are talking about consolidating some programs. Some of them are talking about eliminating a few programs. If you look long-term at the trajectory, particularly if we don't have big fee increases, it's not sustainable unless we get it. Now, Boise State's different because of their increased enrollment, but the other three institutions don't have the enrollment growth to pay for their overhead, to pay for their costs of occupancy costs, and I have pledged with the presidents and the state board to look at ongoing funding for education. Is it line item, like the way we used to do it, which is not my preference? Is it workload adjustment? Is it outcome based? Is it more money for scholarships? There's like 4 different ways of solving long-term the higher education funding, and there's not a good enough consensus at this point in time. That's why I admitted to the presidents, I said, I've been awful focused on K-12 for the last year and haven't spent enough time, but I got 4 new presidents, I got 2 new board members, and with that atmosphere, I look to come up with a good consensus by the budget planning process next fall.
Thank you. The next question is from Jimena Bustillo of the Idaho Statesman.
Hi. So Idaho is one of the only states that still doesn't necessarily have its own regulations on hemp products and hemp farming. Recently, another bill has been introduced to try and create the legalization of that farming and that production. How big of a priority is it for you to pass definitive legislation on hemp farming and hemp product sales within the state?
Well, I've been very consistent about this. I come from an agricultural background. I've never grown hemp. I had some friends in college that were growing a similar product. You know, my issue is I'm fine with hemp as long as it's not camouflage for marijuana. And I believe, you know, I did an executive order for ITD and state police to try and match up with the federal rules. I have not seen the details of the most recent bill, but I believe it, you know, we were almost there at the end of the session last year, but when you get into these end of session where the House and Senate are, their natural reaction is to perhaps not agree with the other body's compromise or not compromise, that's a problem. But I think it's early enough. I think we'll get a hemp bill this year.
The next question is from Bill Spence.
Governor Representative Troy has legislation that would assist with funding for shooting ranges for maintenance and expansion. In her presentation on that bill, she mentioned that you and Director Keeley had been going down to Nevada to work some of the shows and try to attract ammunition and businesses in that industry. I guess, can you talk more generally about your efforts along that line that you talked about?
Did you all hear the question?
No.
Okay, Bill talked about Representative Troy's bill, and there are a couple other sponsors on more access to shooting ranges and enhancing shooting ranges. And then he asked about my trip to the SHOT Show with Director Keeley and the munitions and the recreation and the outdoor industry. Well, first on that bill is basically on fish and game property, and there was a bill a few years ago that kind of protected, grandfathered in all the shooting ranges, and I wasn't a big fan of it. I think I supported it because, and I've got a little personal experience because I got a shooting range on part of our ranch ground, or the boys' now, not mine. And I've actually been, to me, having you know, designated sites where the safety issues are addressed, where you know, the end of it is there's a plate where they can go recycle the lead. It helps with stray lead from a environmental standpoint. It's safer. You can teach kids about hunter safety out there. There's a great need, given the growing population, for more gun ranges. But sometimes you want to have it next to an urban area. Somebody might say, I'll allow this place to be used for a shooting range, but 20, 30, 40 years down the road, I might want to change it. That NRA bill has said it's in perpetuity. I thought dampened down some of that opportunity, and I wouldn't mind revisiting that because, you know, having a gun range for 30, particularly a safe, controlled gun range for 30 years is better than not having one at all. We need more organized gun ranges where the safety is protected, to where particularly kids and people that haven't gone out before can learn all the aspects of you know, hunting and then sports shooting. So I'm enthusiastic about it, but we need to have more opportunity around Idaho. So.
The next question is
So,
from Deb.
this
Oh, I'm
was
sorry.
a
Oh,
follow-up.
Bill's follow-up.
Sorry.
Can you talk in general about some of the efforts that you make on economic development?
Sure. Well, we have, on a per capita basis, we have one of the most robust, what I call rec tech. And at the SHOT Show, there's obviously a lot of gun and ammunition people there, but Buck Knives is there. There's people that make river rafts. It's not just that, but the SHOT Show, by its very nature, is mainly for the most part the gun industry, but there's also people that make tents and a lot of other things. And to me, what I really like about that industry is the fact that it's scalable out to rural Idaho. Night Force, in your neck of the woods at Orofino, they make some of the best scopes in the world for both sporting and for the military, and they provide great jobs in Orofino. They take those kids that and men and women that were in the sawmill industry, and they're making some of the best product in the world, and that's economic development out in rural Idaho where I really want it. And that's just one example. There's an outfit right there in McCall, one of the only manufacturing facilities in McCall where they make parts for that industry. And that's a lot of my interest in it, is how it works out in Idaho as a way to diversify the commodity, do manufacturing, provide good paying jobs, and that's has always been my interest. I think we're either one or two on a per capita basis for rec tech jobs, and of course in your town it's enormous. It's a huge but it also goes with making aluminum jet boats too. So.
Okay, the next question is from Devin Downey of Idaho Public Television.
Hi, Governor. So the last couple years, Idaho has lost a few federal court cases that has cost the state millions of dollars.
Actually, you haven't been around long enough. It's been longer than that, but go ahead.
Well, and that just continues with what I was going to say. There's multiple bills being introduced this year that either flat out fly in the face of recent court rulings or themselves are going to get challenged. You yourself are appealing to the Supreme Court for the Adri Edmo case. Are you comfortable using taxpayer money on these lawsuits? And second, are you confident that if the Supreme Court takes up this case, that the state will win?
From a overarching position, if the people of Idaho, through their legislature, feel very passionate about an issue that they think might have a chance, that's part of our process. Generally, if we know it's the proverbial snowball in hell chance, I'm not a huge fan of it because of the costs of what it is. But if we think, and I look at this as a governor relative to all the other governors, is some of these challenges, whether it's on the social side or whether it's on the resource side or whether it's on the business side, that we as states have an obligation, if we think there's something taking place that we don't agree with, to judicially challenge it. And I would love to have all the states share in that, to where just a small group of states aren't the ones that do that. And so yes, I think it's necessary sometime but I also, for me, the bar is, you know, fairly high, that it should be, we should have a chance of it, and just because of the prudence of how we spend taxpayers' money.
Any follow-up, Devin?
Yeah, are you confident that the Supreme Court will rule in the state's favor in the Edmo case?
In the Edmo case,
If they hear it, if they agree
Yes.
to hear it?
now, 100% no, but because of the conflicting rulings out of other district courts, I think we are. I wouldn't be spending the state's money if I didn't think we had a chance.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Madison Hardy of McClure Center.
Hey, Madison.
I was just wondering, kind of piggybacking off of what Jim said earlier about the transgender bills that have been introduced in the legislation recently and alongside with the social emotional learning. Idaho has not always had the best relationship with LGBTQ communities, and Representative McCoskey, I believe, said it. I'm worried that this bill will make trans girls believe that they are not real girls and trans women believe that they are not real women. How do you think this is going to affect, if any of these go and pass through our legislation, that is going to affect our communities internally, and how it's going to make our state look nationally?
Well, and that bill's got quite a ways yet to go, and that's part of the legislative process. Is somebody introduces a bill, you have hearings, preferably on both sides, and that issue is vetted. I don't think we ought to be sending signals that we're intolerant in Idaho. That's my personal position. But on the other hand, you know, some of the stories about what could happen down the road, and a lot of legislation is introduced about what could happen, and that's part of the process, and I'll look forward to seeing what takes place at that point in time. So.
Any follow-up, Madison?
Going off of that, you know, we have other instances within, I know that there is a transgender inmate that received some attention as well about hunger surgery while in jail. Do you think that any of these conjunctions of events just cause a difference?
Well, you know, there's a difference in the two cases significantly. You know, the issue is for the inmate Edmo is should the state pay when our professionals, our health professionals, are saying this is not necessary. We have numerous inmates that are getting hormone treatment, that are getting other issues. The question is, does us doing our job, which we have to do and we should do, of taking care of our inmates, does it elevate up to what to that issue? And that I see that as a different issue, because there, you know, there's other elective surgeries not related to sexual identity that we obviously as states don't want to pay for every elective surgery as part of our corrections costs. Because I'd rather spend that corrections money on rehabilitating our inmates to where I don't have the recidivism rate.
Next question, believe it or not, is from Dan Hopkins.
Well, blast from the past.
So Governor, you were anticipating multiple questions on property taxes, and I don't think you've got enough, so I have several. Were you presiding in the Senate when the inflation indexing was repealed or was capped at 100,000?
I don't think I was presiding, I think I was
Were you
voting.
a member of the Senate?
I was, I voted.
Did you vote for that?
I voted against it.
You voted against it. Did you see, as sophisticated as you are about real estate, oh, come on.
Oh, here it comes.
Did you see this train wreck coming? And you having opposed that protection for homeowners, do you see restoring the inflation indexing as key to the solution of the big problem that
Well,
you talked about,
well-
the process is going to work, and where's your voice going to be?
Well, let me back up about my vote. I voted against the fact that the index, because it was an index, didn't reflect the differences in different communities. That the CPIU, which is the index they use for the housing price, that was actually an idea that was brought forward by Keith Allred, and Keith and I were kind of as you well know, policy nerds, and I work with Keith on a lot of those issues, and I knew what he was doing, I knew where he was going, but I argued with the fact that that one index for the whole state of Idaho doesn't reflect, you know, we got some areas where real estate prices are going down, and to cast that index all over the state. Now, to move the number is something that perhaps we ought to look at. You know,
Why not index it for inflation?
well, because
What was the matter with that solution?
putting tax policy on autopilot is not fundamentally, to me, a good policy. Any kind of tax policy you put on autopilot does not require the legislature to make the decision either to do it or not to do it, and then there may be a consequence elsewhere. The issue of having tax policy on autopilot, I don't think is a good idea.
But would you support the concept of restoring, making up for all that? I mean, you didn't answer the train wreck question. You
Well-
knew this was gonna happen, didn't you?
Yes, that's fair. But it, out of all the smorgasbord, freezes, new construction, change of the index, the circuit breaker, all those ideas need to get out there, and they're getting out there right now. And then the legislature, in their wisdom, has to decide what addresses the problem and doesn't fix a little problem over in one district and cause a great big one somewhere else.
Okay, the next question is from James Dawson of Boise State Public Radio.
Governor, over the weekend, you had the Idaho Statesman print a story about 11 children in Canyon County and 2 in Owyhee County over the last 5 years died as part of the faith healing community. Is Idaho abdicating its responsibility to the very first part of Idaho's Constitution, saying that all men have inalienable rights, including the right to enjoy and defend life, by repeatedly punting on this issue year after year?
I mean, the legislature has really struggled with this because it's a balance of religious freedom. It's a balance of parental freedom. I do not condone it. I mean, I think that these kids ought to be taken care of. I do know that some of the people that know that there are instances where members of that faith group do reach out and get some help, but not all the time. And one of the issues is if we pass some significant law, will some of this take place where nobody even knows about it?
Right, but would saving, 9 of these 11 children's lives mean more than letting all, 13 of them die?
I look forward to the legislature trying to address this problem. The bills that I've seen, after I hear the pro and con on both sides, I will address it when I see it, but I don't, is there even a bill RS'd up this year?
Not yet.
So,
Okay, the next question is from Bill Spence, and we only have a few minutes left, so let's make the questions short.
and the answer is long.
Governor, apparently there's a move in eastern Oregon to try to join the greater state of Idaho. Are you encouraging that?
Well, no, but I was on Fox News Live this morning from about 3 hours ago on that very issue. So that'll be on your Twitter feeds or something later. But I said, well, there's a lot of water's got to run under the bridge before that happens. I understand the frustration of some of my Oregon friends about, the rules, the laws, the regulations that are coming out of Oregon, but that's a decision that's got to be made there. It's got to be made in Idaho, and it's got to be made in Congress. But I think a lot of it is they're reacting, as is often the case. I've got places in rural Idaho that they think Boise, Idaho is a den of iniquity, and there's lots of rules coming out that they don't necessarily like. So, but they're exercising their right, and there is a statutory route to change the state law. I'm a state line, and I'm trying to think when the last time that was. I just saw the story this weekend, so it would be interesting to see when the last time a state line was redrawn. And they asked me this morning what the name of the state was going to be, and I said, well, it's going to be Idaho here. I don't know what they're going to do. So.
Do you think, on a more serious level, do you think it provides good national publicity for Idaho and its approach to government?
I was not surprised. I'm surprised how much running room, but this issue goes back to the founding of this country about people that don't think that they're being represented because of the changing demographic of a state. There's going to be a constitutional amendment in Idaho that locks our legislative districts into 35. There was an earlier proposal to move it up to 40 because some of these legislative districts are getting so big. That is part of that dialogue about the fact that just because of modern society, urban area, smaller districts get smaller and bigger districts get bigger, and it's unfortunate, but I don't know how you stop it.
Our final question this morning is from Scott Logan of CBS 2, and I'm sorry we're out of time after that.
Okay, well, following up on what Mr. Pompey's been talking about on property taxes, this property tax freeze, I've been sitting through the hearings, people say we are victims of our own success. And then you listen to people who are being priced out of their own homes. How do you deal with growth? I mean, how do we stop the negative effects of this as soon as possible?
Well, the alternative is worse. My big deal is that we have opportunities for our kids to stay in Idaho, and after the last recession, we had way too many kids move out of the state. Now, I didn't think I was going to be as successful in the last few years as we are today, and we have to, whether it's school capacity, whether it's road capacity, whether it's social service capacity, we have to address all those issues, and some of it's going to take more money. The property tax issue is really an issue of balance. Is one, because of the huge spike in residential values, which I knew they were going to go up. I had no idea they were going to go up this much. If I would have invested the state's pension fund all in residential property in Idaho, and we'd be getting even a better return than we are right now. No, I wouldn't have done that. But that's our job, is to address these problems where things get out of balance. The problem is it's not uniform everywhere. Here in this valley, it's enormous. But you get to a lot of other places, there's places where people's property taxes are going down because there's new growth coming in, and growth is lowering the burden for everybody else. So it's all the unintended consequences of a big spike in residential property taxes. And I named them off before. There's a dozen different things they can do. That includes the circuit breaker. You talked about people being priced out of their homes. You could adjust the circuit breaker. You could you could index the number, which I think will probably be proposed. You could move the number, which may be proposed. You can do the freeze, that's the bill that's up there. You could stop new construction, but that's a smorgasbord of issues, all of them intended to address that growth in residential property values, but you got to look at the unintended consequences.
Do you believe then that Representative Moyle's freeze bill is a shimmer-up, that it's
Well, no, I think it was cast as, and I don't think they were bashful about it. It's one of the options, and they may, they want to get cities and counties to the table to negotiate on this, because the state doesn't get any of that money. That money all goes out to local government. It goes to highway districts, schools, cities, counties, and but I'm somewhat sympathetic to the cities and counties, because they have some of them that are huge winners and some of them that are losers, and the unintended consequences of doing something radical is it may benefit a certain class of taxpayers in a certain community, but it may penalize somebody somewhere else. And I'm worried about penalizing commissioners city council members, school board members that have been very thrifty and very frugal and thought at a time when the economy picked up they'd be able to do some things, and now we're saying no, and that's all I have to say about that.
Governor, thank you so much.
Thanks,
for taking
Betsy.
the time